Welcome to the Superstar Communicator podcast. My name is Susan Heaton-Wright, a leading impact, speaking and communications expert. My aim is to show you how to make an impact so you will be heard, listened to and respected for career success. Listen weekly to the podcast and go to our website, superstarcommunicator.com. Hello everybody, this is Susan Heaton-Wright from Superstar Communicator. Now, we are in the midst of the coronavirus. This is being interviewed during the coronavirus, and I'm going to get it out there straight away to support you, the listeners, because we're working in a different way, we're communicating in a different way, and I want you to get the most value so that you can be the awesome people you are. Now, we've got a treat today. As ever, I'm not letting you down, listeners. We've got another amazing person. He is a real minority. Darren Harris is a high-impact global professional speaker, inspiring any audience to become a real minority in their industry. He gives you the step-by-step process that helped him perform at the highest level for over 20 years, compete at 2 Paralympic Games in 2 different sports, and become England's most capped and most decorated blind footballer. Unlike most speakers, he also backs up what he says with his own research, interviewing industry experts and high achievers demonstrating a minority mindset. So welcome.
Hi, Susan. Happy to speak to you today.
I love your voice and your accent, because obviously we're from the same part of England, aren't we?
Yeah, good old Midlands. So I'm from Wolverhampton originally, and now I live in Birmingham. I don't really think I've got much of an accent left, but obviously since I've come back to Birmingham in the last 8 years, people have been telling me that my accent's kind of been coming back. But I've been a bit nomadic, living kind of all over different parts of Britain, and and actually, I think for a large part of my life, my accent wasn't something I was particularly proud of. I always remember as a kid, kind of people assumed or thought you were stupid just because of the way you spoke. Yeah. And there was a school in the Black Country which kind of told people not to speak the way we do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always remember seeing my my reference from my old headmistress, and she said, Susan is very well enunciated. It was almost as though that needed to be said because you came from Birmingham.
Yeah, I do. I know, and I've got people who are from the Midlands who are kind of ashamed of the way they speak, and there are people outside the Midlands who kind of, castigate people for the way they speak. And I don't really know where it came from. I'd love to kind of sort of study the history as to why, the Black Country in Birmingham has kind of been looked down upon as some sort of second-rate language, because accents are just accents, aren't they?
I totally agree. I love different accents. I mean, obviously, I work on people on their communication, their spoken communication. And I love it when people have different accents because it's part of them. And as long as they speak clearly so other people can understand them, then that's brilliant. But if you've got a really, really strong accent, and we both know the really strong Black Country accent is pretty incomprehensible.
I think as well, being blind as I am,
yes.
it does help when people don't all sound like they're from the BBC, to be really honest. So I can actually distinguish people a lot easier if they do have more variation in their accents. There's been many a time when I've walked down the street or on a bus and someone's said hello to me and I haven't had a clue who it was. So that's another advantage for me.
Oh, brilliant. That's, you've brought us on to what is so incredible about you, that you are a blind footballer, that you have you have competed in 2 Paralympic Games, different sports. It's absolutely incredible. So tell me more about this.
So I think football was in my DNA from a very small child. I was always a very active kid. In fact, I always remember being at school and a teacher saying to me, you know, sit down and shut up was kind of a popular popular phrase, and I ended up becoming a professional footballer and a professional speaker. I think it's not very natural to ask a child to sit down for 7 hours a day in a classroom. And, you know, we look at some of the problems you have today around obesity and some of the other issues. And I think a lot of that's to do with the fact that, you know, people are just penned up in classrooms. And I just wanted to get out there and run around. It wasn't that I hated learning or anything like that. You know, I went to university, I studied maths at university. I was clearly a bright kid, but that environment didn't get the best out of me. So, but I was very fortunate that I was able to, you know, kind of go to university. I actually did a normal job, like many people do. I went to work for an IT company for basically nearly 10 years. But alongside that, I always played football, you know, and when I played for England, back then it was an amateur sport. You know, when I made my England debut back in '96, you know, we trained ourselves really in the week, and then we met up at weekends and had sort of training camps every month, and that's how it was. We funded our own trips abroad, and I remember standing at train stations shaking buckets and trying to organise our own sponsorship to get to different events, and you know, it was completely different to how it is now. That's for sure.
It's incredible because, as we know, and quite rightly, Paralympians are well supported financially to prepare.
Yeah, I mean, the FA got involved, and obviously UK Sport, and you know, brought in sort of lottery funding, which helped remunerate the athletes, so they could really focus on training. And obviously, you're never going to get better at what you do unless you give it 100% of your commitment. So yeah, absolutely. When in 2004, when we didn't qualify for the Athens Paralympic Games because, you know, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland wouldn't sanction us to play as Great Britain, that's the point at which I decided I had to go full time. And that's when I changed sport. When I became a judo athlete. I was a black belt in judo, but I knew that I wouldn't make it to Beijing unless I trained full time, you know, which is six days a week, you know, twice a day, every day. And and I suppose the hardest bit about it was at no point did I ever know that I was going to qualify. Do you know what I mean? But it keeps you honest in a way. It keeps you absolutely focused on what you're doing. And, you know, you don't ever think too far ahead. You don't ever get above your station. It just keeps you mindful, present in the moment.
I'm really pleased that you brought up the idea of being in the present, because listeners, we've talked a lot about being nervous, about managing your fear, and certainly with the situation as it is at the moment with the coronavirus, it can be very easy to let your mind wander to what happens, the ifs and the buts. Can you use that same idea of being in the present, in your opinion, for the present situation?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely relevant for the current climate. None of us know the future. You know, we all have concerns about the future, what might happen to our jobs, what might happen to our income, you know, what it means for our families. And you know, and it can be incredibly disabling, you know, in essence, you know, the anxiety that it causes. I mean, I've heard some of my friends talking about, you know, ventilators, you know, the lack of ventilators, for example. And I go, you know, unless you've got a contact in a company that makes ventilators, that's probably not something you need to add to your to your sort of mode of thinking. You know, it's really focusing on what you can control, what can you influence, what can you change. And and we've all seen how things have changed literally day by day. You know,
Yes.
the government have literally been changing the information that we've had to absorb day by day. So we have to really live in the moment and not think too far ahead. You know, everyone's now talking about, well, when's the peak going to be? And then already starting to think about when a school's going to open, when a business is going to open. And you can get a little bit ahead of yourself and
Yeah.
distracted from literally taking your eye off the ball and not doing what you need to do today. Because, as an athlete, you always see where when I qualify for the games, and with the medals that I've won in my career, it's only at the end where you're able to look back and think, wow, this is how far I've come. But you
Yes.
only got to that point because you, day by day, incrementally did everything you needed to do. So, that's what we all need to do now, is focus on today. What can I do today to enhance my life, to enhance my family's life, to make things better for my business? Is there something I could learn, whether it's a piece of technology, is a connection that I need to make, is there someone else that I can help? Because at some point in the future they may be able to help you. And those are the kind of things that I've been doing in my business.
Oh, that is really, really useful to hear. And listeners, I hope that you've taken that on board, because this is a really, really useful message.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't emphasize that any more than I already have. It's and it is really hard, because sometimes in fact, one of the things I have done in terms of, because social media allows us to share so much information in such a quick period of time, that as soon as I see frequently forward video now, I actually pretty much go delete. Or
Absolutely.
when people are sending them, I said, you better tell me what's in this video that's of use to me today, before I'll even consider opening it. Because what people don't realize is that often you get the same video from 10 different people, and some of the stuff that has been put in these videos is just utter garbage.
I know.
And all I can say is it's increasing people's anxiety, stress, and panic.
Yes. Certainly I have muted some people, and I'm not spending the time on social media that I did, other than LinkedIn, for my business, for that very reason, because it's not good for mental health.
Definitely not.
So let's go back to when you were in the Olympics. How did you feel competing for your country?
It was, firstly, I remember the day that I knew I'd qualified. And what happened in judo is that you got points from different tournaments, and then there was a ranking list that was published, and it took them ages to publish this ranking list. So I remember sitting down with a spreadsheet, trying to work it out myself. I knew all my competitors, and I was like checking out their results in their tournaments, and I was trying to like work it out manually. And I thought I'd done enough, but I just didn't know. But when the news came through, I was just overwhelmed. I remember the day, we flew out to Macau, which is where the holding camp was. And but then when we arrived in the village in Beijing, it was just, it was incredible, really. It was sort of a lifetime's work. It's 10 days or 12 days that you're there for, but you've got there through what you've done over the preceding 4, 8, 10, 12, 20 years. And and then I was so nervous going into my match. Normally for a judo competition, you get the draw the day before the tournament, but for the Paralympics, we got the draw 2 days early. Right. And that gave me another day to stress, to be honest. I don't think I dealt with it particularly well, if I'm honest. I can look back on that and think, you know what, I was just kind of overwhelmed. But
Yeah.
I know I drew the Cuban in the first round, and he was world champion. I never beat him before, and I never beat him after. And sometimes you just hold your hand up and just say, he was too good for me that day.
Yeah.
And but thinking about communication, I remember you go through something called the mix zone, which is where all the journalists and the athletes get to meet after your event. So I'm walking through the mix zone, and this journalist from the BBC comes up to me with a sort of fluffy microphone, sort of sticks it in my face, and she goes, "How do you feel?"
Oh, oh, well, I feel like thumping you on the nose, actually.
Yeah, so I didn't thump her on the nose, but I paused for a moment, and then I said to her something like, imagine your best friend sleeping with your partner. Now put that into words. And then I just walked off. And I remember watching the highlights on the BBC reel later that day, and Claire Balding was presenting the show, and she kind of says, unfortunately we don't have an interview from Darren Harris because he walked out of his interview. So but it's so hard to communicate how you feel in that moment,
Yeah.
when you've put so much into what you do. And but I think I did sum it up pretty well, even if it wasn't something she wanted to broadcast.
I think that we expect an awful lot of people just after they have performed, because you know, everything is happening in your body, chemically as well. You've had adrenaline, there's a sudden drop afterwards, um, and to expect athletes, performers as well, singers and everything. Quite often at Glastonbury, they're interviewed straight after. They're interviewed beforehand, which I think is unacceptable, actually, because they're preparing. But you come off stage, or you come off the field, and there are things going on. For you to be coherent and to be able to say something that is of value to the audience, yet still respects you, is a big ask.
Absolutely, and we do go through media training, and probably not as much as, say, a politician might. But you watch those guys in these press conferences, and they're literally getting questions thrown at them left, right, and centre. And you've had time to prepare what you're going to ask someone, but they're literally answering on the hoof, and it can be very disorientating, and
Yeah,
sometimes they don't say what they meant to say.
yeah.
And it's really difficult.
And it's so interesting, because obviously I was a stage performer, and
Mm.
there are the real similarities there. And I always remember coming off stage. I'd done a recital at music college, and these are very high pressurized things, because you've got all your contemporaries there, you're being marked and everything. Obviously it wasn't the Olympics, but I remember my teacher coming round as I came off stage, waving a list of about 25 things that I'd got wrong. Now these were things like, I had breathed in the wrong place within a phrase, and my double T wasn't strong enough. It was teeny weeny things like that.
Yeah.
The collision of that with not being in the moment was devastating. It was actually quite dangerous, because I speak to other performers as well, and they feel exactly the same way. You start looking around for that person to tell you what you got wrong, rather than celebrating the moment.
Absolutely, yeah. It's really easiest for us to focus on those mistakes, and actually sometimes your audience doesn't even notice some of the mistakes you
No.
made, but then they highlight it, and you think, well, God, maybe everybody's noticed when they probably haven't. So absolutely, and there's a time to do it. I think when we play games, we go through the sort of, we video all of our games now, and you do the sort of post-match analysis, and you go through it. But you're not going to do that straight after when you know
No.
as you said, when your emotions are here, there, and everywhere, depending on the outcome of the performance. You know, you want to you want to reflect and learn when you're in an environment to learn. You know,
And
so
in a better mental state that you're able to look at it in a balanced way.
yeah, yeah. You know, you've parked what's happened,
Yes.
and you can now start to sort of move forward and yeah, you're just more objective, I think.
Yes.
While when it's raw and it's fresh, it's a lot more difficult to do that, and you sometimes put too much significance on some things and too little on other bits.
Absolutely. So, how did you feel when you won your medals?
So I've always think they became less important as I went along. You know, when I kind of think back now, looking through my career now, I've finished competing now, but I suppose I never really recreated the buzz of that first one. Um, that first one was like, oh wow, just won a medal at the European Championships, but after that, it never kind of quite felt the same. You know, you're always sort of hunting for something that I don't know. I feel like a drug addict here, but I think
Maybe.
there are parallels in the sense that you know you kind of know what it feels like. I don't. When I look back on my career, I don't think the medals are the most important part of it, um, and I suppose that was always the end result of what you did, but I started to value what I put into my performances. And I tell you why I say that is because we went on after the games, we went on a tour bus round London, and you know, I think 500,000, 1 million people came out to sort of celebrate, you know, the Olympic and Paralympic teams. and I was I was on this bus, and I remember someone shouting from below, you know, what sport do you do? And I said that it was judo at the time. I said judo, and he goes, "Are you guys going to win any medals?" I went, I went, okay. And what had happened in Beijing was they'd upgraded the medalists to first class, and the non-medalists just flew standard class, and so we all kind of yeah. So people don't know these things. You know, we talked about our greatest team, and but we weren't really one team. There was definitely a divide between those who have and those who have not. And then when we landed in Heathrow, the guys who won medals, they went off to the front and they were interviewed by the media, and then the rest of us sort of shuffled out the back door and went back to our went back to our regions with our tails between our legs. But I've always believed that we didn't all start at the same point in life.
No, absolutely.
And so you've really got to respect the journey that you've had. You know, I came to judo really late, and you know, it's something I took up because, you know, I wasn't allowed to go with a different sport. And so other people might not know that, but I knew that in myself. I knew the journey that I'd been on. I knew what I'd put in, invested into my sport in terms of, you know, time and money and effort. And I never believed for one moment that those people who'd won medals had trained any harder than I had. It's just
No,
that we had a different journey.
I think that you're absolutely right about that. Um, we should be celebrating all of the achievements.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, and those people who come out with, you know, grades below what they wanted, you know, perhaps they didn't have, you know, the support when they were younger. I mean, I got a maths degree, but I remember when I was at primary school, when I came home from school, my mum would sit down with me and spend time doing extra maths with me. So I'm sure all of that extra effort that she invested in me then served me well further down the road. Now, not everybody's that fortunate.
No.
And so sometimes, we beat ourselves up because we're not where we want to be in life. But as I said, not all of us are lucky enough to have parents who are really supportive, inspirational teachers, or peers that are going to help us along the way.
Yeah.
So that's just our own individual journey.
Yes, and also there can be circumstances. There might be somebody who has a horrific injury, and so their preparation and their, the way that they improve gets impeded for a while.
Yeah, definitely. And some of those things are completely out of your control.
Yes.
So absolutely. I mean, it's thinking about what's happening this year with the coronavirus, and okay, it's not the most important thing in the world, the Olympics been cancelled, for another year, but some athletes have already announced their retirement because they realise that they're not going to make it for another year.
They just can't go on, and that's really sad. But this is something that you're probably going to hammer me down on this one. With the athletics, and I love athletics. I used to compete before I had my car accident. I competed at county level and at university and things like that. And so often in these meets they say, oh, and so it's so good, but she's got an injury. There's almost an excuse even before they start.
I think you probably much, if you're a full-time elite athlete, you're pretty much always carrying a niggle.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And when you're training twice a day every day, there's no way in this world you're not going to have little niggles, and you have to learn to manage that. You have to put it to the back of your mind, and do the best you can with what you've got. And that's just how it is. I mean, we're all having to do that at the moment. We're all having to make the best of what we've got at the moment. And yes, it'd be great if everything was perfect and there was no aches and pains and there was no niggles, and do you know what I mean, your customers and your suppliers, they had their cash flows. It'd be great, wouldn't it, if everything worked well all of the time? But that isn't the real world, and we have to function in the best way we can.
Absolutely. Now, before I ask you your 3 top tips, I'm very intrigued by one part of your bio when you say, unlike most speakers, he backs up what he says with his own research, interviewing industry experts.
Yeah. Well, I think it'd be easy for me to sort of say, well, this is what I did, and that follow what I do, and you will achieve what I have. I don't think that necessarily translates.
No.
So I wanted to go and speak to other successful people, other people who stand out in their industries, who are the minorities within industries, and find out how they did it, and then look for commonalities and see if there are some sort of common themes that go across the board. But yeah, it'd be very, very arrogant for me to say, well, do as I do, and and everything will be fine.
I totally agree with you. I'm sure that you quote research from other people.
Absolutely, yeah. But people that I've spoken to, or people whose books I've read as well, and people whose interviews I've listened to. But absolutely, I try and I don't quote Albert Einstein because I never met Albert Einstein. But I think it's about kind of keeping it present.
Definitely, because in fact on this podcast I've interviewed Joe McCormack a couple of times. We've become good mates, and he's written 2 books about communication, and I often quote him, and certainly other researchers. If I've not been able to talk to them, I've gone back to their research and studied it for myself, rather than just quoting verbatim what everybody else quotes. And I think it's really important.
Yeah, well, I mean, I studied. So after my maths degree, I ended up studying psychology, and And it came about because of a conversation I had with a sports psychologist called Pete Lindsay, who back then he was the psychologist for the English Institute of Sport. I think now he works in Manchester City as one of their lead psychologists. So he's a pretty amazing guy.
Yeah.
But I was really cynical about psychology, or not cynical, skeptical, probably
Yeah.
the right word. And I remember walking into his office and sitting down in front of him, and he kind of said to me, well, I said to him, well, can you guarantee me a gold medal? And he goes, no. so, so then I said, well, is there any point me speaking to you then? And because, yeah, I think my focus was, well, to be good at sport, obviously you have to work on the technical aspects, you have to work on the physical aspects, but I never ever appreciated how important psychology was until my meeting with him. And I came out of that meeting wanting to know more. I thought, well, how does this work? Why do I choose this music? What impact does it have? What effect do I want it to have? Am I focusing on the words? Am I focusing on the beats? Is it the tempo? And really looking at my arousal levels and just thinking about performing at my very best from every level. So I went away and studied it, and I think we've all got to be in a space where we're willing to learn.
Yes,
every day.
Definitely. So this brings me on to your 3 top tips.
Yeah, so I think my first top tip was about emphasizing your message and using all those features of your voice, volume, pitch, tone, etc. I mean, this really comes from football, in blind football, where we'd had team meetings before, or during the match, and the coach would be shouting, "Calm down!" And I'm thinking, well, you're not conveying that with your voice, are you? If you want someone to calm down, you wouldn't shout it in a kind of panicked sound. You would say, "Calm," you know. But there might be times where you need someone to do something really quickly, an emergency thing, and and that you convey that with your voice. And I think we don't use the whole range and capability of our voice to communicate that message.
And I would imagine that because you're blind, you are using your other senses far more.
Absolutely. So, I mean, in blind football, everything comes in through my ears. So I've got information coming in from my goalkeeper who can see. I've got information coming from the coach, information coming from the guide behind the opposition goal. I've got my teammates talking to me. I can hear the opposition players communicating with each other. So it's really important to get the most amount of information across in the shortest amount of time.
Yes.
And so the words you choose and how you say them and when you say them are really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a high score from me. So what's your next one?
So my second one was remove distractions.
Yeah.
I remember speaking at a conference, and I was on a really high stage, and I did, my talk went pretty well. And afterwards, we collected all the feedback forms from the delegates, and on one of them, someone had written, "I was worried you were going to fall off the stage." And I thought to myself, okay, so all through my talk, this particular delegate was worried about me falling off the stage. So if they're worried about me falling off the stage, they're not really listening to my message. And so I thought to myself, well, what can I do to prevent my listener being distracted? How can I make them tune in on my message? And I thought, well, I have to deal with those issues in advance. So now if I speak on a high stage, I use this line, and it's not my line. I heard Tim Gard, who's an American speaker, use it the other day, but I'm not sure where it came from originally. But I'll say something like, "I know what you're thinking. You're worried I'm going to fall off the stage, but if I do, I'll take some questions from the floor."
Oh, brilliant. Yeah.
Now,
Excellent.
you know, and it gets a few laughs and you know, a few cheap laughs. But what it does is that it puts my audience at
Definitely.
ease, and you know, now they're realizing that I've got that base covered. Now they can start listening to what I'm going to say, because they're not worried, you know, when I make a step here that, you know, crash bang wallop. And even if there is a crash bang wallop, well, you know, I'll deal with it anyway. And
Yeah.
so and so we've got to think about what stops our audience tuning in to our message, you know. And it could be, if it's face to face, it could be what you're wearing. You know, maybe
Yeah.
you've got, you know, some bright clothing, or you know, something in your hair, or some jewelry which is just distracting
Yes.
your listener. You know, maybe it's something going on in their own lives. Do you know, maybe
Definitely. Yes.
you know, we've got to, you might say to them, you know, I know, for example, you're overrunning, the conference is overrunning perhaps, and you know that your audience is thinking about their tea break or their lunch break. You know, you might have to deal with that. You might have to say, guys, you know, we're running over schedule here, and I know that you're thinking about your lunch, but can I just keep you in the room for 5 more minutes?
Yes.
And we've just got to put ourselves in our audience's position, and think about what's stopping them from tuning in. What's the thing that's distracting them?
Absolutely. Brilliant. And your final one?
So my third tip is pause. Remember that language is processed linearly. Now, for those who aren't mathematical, you know, we process language. You know, it comes sequentially. You know, visual information, we can see the big picture all at once, but language doesn't happen that way. And so sometimes we overload our listeners with too much information, and they're just not able to process it, you know, as quickly as we might want. And in fact, I was at a presentation recently, and the speaker was well intending. You know, he said, you know, he wanted to over deliver, so he wanted to give us as much information as he could in the time that he had with us. But how much of it will sink in if you just cram it? You know, our brains are a little bit like sponges, and there's only so much they can absorb in that amount of time. So I think sometimes we have to, you know, we might want to give them this information now, but perhaps we have to let them absorb what we've given them today, and then we come back tomorrow, check if they've absorbed that. And maybe it might take a week, and then we give them the next bit of information, and then check if they've absorbed that, and then you give them the next bit of information. And we've just got to be a little bit more patient, I think, at times. Or we record our content, and when, you know, we encourage them to, you know, to go back through it during their own time, and you know, they can absorb it at their own pace.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much for those. Now, Darren, obviously we're working in a virtual world now, so people wouldn't be able to see you physically. But can you let the audience, the listeners, know how they could get in contact with you? How are you involved in any virtual summits, for example, that people can hear you?
So you can go to my website, which is darrenharrisgb.com. I am, you know, this has been an opportunity for me to learn about the virtual world. You know, so I've been using Zoom, I've been using Mentimeter, I've been using some of the various technologies, and I think it's an opportunity for us all to think about how we communicate with a different audience. You know, when I speak at live events, sometimes I ask my audience a question, and you get 2 or 3 people who stick their hands up. You know, the brave ones or the extroverts, but perhaps you only hear their voice and their questions. And with some of the software that's out there now, you can get the whole audience to put their opinions and ideas into the melting pot. So I think that's what I really want to do now, is go and practice with some of these technologies and see if it's not doing things in a different way, but actually perhaps we can solve different problems and
Yes.
and attract different clients and different customers who perhaps work better in an online world. You know, some people don't like the live shows, perhaps. So I've seen it as an opportunity for me, and I hope, you know, all your listeners look at it as an opportunity for them as well.
Yes, absolutely. The world is going to change when we come out of this crisis.
And we have to be ready for that.
Yes.
And the more we can do now to be ready for whenever the show gets back on the road, then the better placed we will be to prosper in the new world post coronavirus.
Absolutely. And as you say, we might be serving a different type of audience. Definitely.
And you know, I've heard so many people say, "Oh, I'm a technophobe. I don't like technology," and some of those have been dragged kicking and screaming. But you know, there's a lovely old lady on the back of my house, and you know, I gave her a call the other day to check on how she was getting on, and she's 75, and she told me that she'd just done her first online shopping.
Oh.
And I thought, wow, good on you. And you know, if she can learn to do her shopping online, what can the rest of us do to make sure that we can still live and love and achieve in the new world?
Absolutely. And that is a good note to finish on. Darren, it has been an absolute pleasure and an honour to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to the Superstar Communicator podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and review the podcast on iTunes and on apps. Please contact us if you want to discuss any topic, could suggest a topic for us to include, or a guest who could come onto the podcast. Go to superstarcommunicator.com.